the audio is working if you can hear me. But eventually, maybe by the last webinar, we'll have intro music to get you in the mood for bikepacking workshop. Amesbury, Mass. I was raised there for a number of years. I was born in Newburyport. Hello, everyone. Okay, we're gonna get started in just one moment. All right. Welcome, everyone. It is January 10th, Wednesday. It's 5 p.m. in the mountain time of the United States. And if this one is like any of the other webinars, people are coming in from all around the country and even the world, which is incredible. Thank you. If you're new to these webinars, we'll do a quick intro, but as folks are signing on, you can go through into the chat and just introduce yourself and where you're signing in from. Throughout the workshop, you can drop questions into either the Q&A or the chat. Noelle, Bikepacking Roots' ED, is here in the background moderating, and she'll be keeping track of the questions. And so when I pause for Q&A sessions throughout this webinar, she'll be able to pull those up. And just remember that we will end with a Q&A. And so if anything isn't covered, then we can save some time at the end to talk about any lingering questions. The chats have been incredible. I think they're turning into a living resource for everyone, and they get sent out after the workshops in addition to the live recording and with the PDF. And so it's a great place to just contribute to what I'm sharing, add resources, have any insights, or just, like I said, just add commentary or questions. And yeah, just on as far as the chat goes, there are over 700 people registered for this. So just do try to keep it on topic so that when this goes out to you all as a resource in the future, it is relevant. Awesome. So we're going to get rolling. If you did not gather through registering, this 8-part Bikepackers Guide virtual workshop series is run through Bikepacking Roots. Bikepacking Roots is a 501c3 nonprofit that was founded in 2017 to advocate for bikepackers and the places that we ride. Our 3 pillars are in community, advocacy, and routes. And we do a lot of work in all those areas to provide valuable resources for bikepackers to find inspiring and empowering routes to ride, to build community, to lower the barriers to bikepacking, and to ensure that that bikepackers have a long future ahead of them of having this opportunity for bikepacking. We have about 17,000 members. Membership is free, and we are a member-driven organization. And so if you join at a paying level, that helps us provide programming and routes that you're experiencing, that you can experience on our website and also through things like tonight. Noelle, as I mentioned, is our ED, Executive Director. She's our first full-time employee as of this year, which is really exciting. And I'm Kait Boyle, and along with another Bikepacking Roots employee, Kurt Refsnyder, we founded the organization and now dedicate our time to routes and community education. For me, I started bikepacking coming from a career in adventure education, where I worked for Prescott College, Knowles, Outward Bound, teaching leadership and education skills in an expeditionary field setting. And after crashing or falling rock climbing, I found the mountain bike and quickly realized that if I carried my overnight kit with me, I could travel through landscapes at a pace that was both digestible and also really inspiring because of being able to see landscapes unfold and connect with communities and people along the way. I rode the Great Divide route on my single speed up in that upper left-hand corner in 2012 And that proved to be a pivotal and transitional moment in my life because that led to teaching the first bikepacking course at the college level at Prescott College with Kurt. And now, over 10 years later, bikepacking is a part of not only a part of my job, but it is a huge way that I get to connect to wild places in a way that really makes my heart sing and also works really well for my body. And I am calling in from my home in Victor, Idaho, which is in the Tetons. One thing that, well, we'll come back to that moment. But for this workshop, this is the third in the series. We first talked about getting started and route planning. In the last session, just before Christmas, we talked about bikes and gear selection and packing your bike. And now we have one of my favorite topics, eat, drink, ride, repeat, which is basically nutrition and hydration for bike packers. The goals, we're going to go through the goals of this workshop, why this is a whole workshop, if it's not evident already, but what I'm hoping to distill in it. And through that, we'll talk about food planning, what you can think about eating, and how to eat in order to support your bikepacking trip. And then also the art of the resupply. And then the second half will be dedicated to how important water is and how water can be such an asset to your bikepacking trip, and just some tricks and tools and skills that you can apply to your bikepacking trip so that water isn't as stressful or as heavy as it might be. There'll be a Q&A after the food section and after the water section, and that will wrap it up. So, why this topic? In the last 12 years of bikepacking, I have bikepacked around the world on 5 different continents on pretty much all self-designed routes, trying to find the biggest wild places aboard my bike, generally in the 3 to 4 week long trip length, which, as you could probably imagine, are pretty physically demanding and take me to places like these locations here. And I also had a stint of time where I was bike pack racing and ultra racing, like 24-hour races and self-supported ultras. Through those events, I was able to set some records and win a world championship with times that still stand today. And I shared on Instagram when sharing about this workshop that I think that my mountain superpower is my ability to eat. And my little anecdote about that is that when I was preparing for the Arizona Trail 300, I was working with a sports nutritionist who I attribute a lot of my knowledge to. And his parting advice was to remember, if you ever start to feel grumpy or negative, eat immediately. And I remember thinking, wow, that's kind of strange advice for someone who usually doles out very objective database guidelines. But sure, I'll do that. And as is the case with any long distance pursuit like bikepacking, I certainly had low points. And in addition to staying on top of my nutrition and hydration plan, I just kept eating and kept drinking whenever I had a negative thought about wanting to quit, or just wondering why I was doing this, or doubting my ability to do it. And inevitably, when it all was said and done, I had consumed thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of calories and had set a record in the race. And the reason that I share this is because we can have the most dialed bikes, gear, fitness, goals, mindset, and skills. But if we don't give our bodies the most fundamental need for food and water, our rides will fall apart. And this could be brief, uh, and caught and fixed, or which is what we call the bonk, or it could be a slow spiral that turns into something that ends up affecting us day to day and ultimately our entire trip, or could even become limiting or inhibiting for our trip. And so, most simply put, food and water supports cellular function, creates energy, and enables recovery. And bikepacking requires all three. And so this rest of the session is dedicated to that food and water. And we're going to start with what happens when you don't have enough of those things, which is the bonk. And I have shared 2 really unglorious photos of me caught in a real life bonk, feeling really annoyed at the person taking the picture because who wants to be documented, ultimately making an error. And so see some laughing faces. Thank you for humoring me. But both instances were that perfect combination of physical exertion, which is almost inevitable at some level while bikepacking. You know, bikes are loaded. We're riding generally some longer distances. We're mentally challenged in new places. And then in both cases, a bit of dehydration and a definitely not enough fuel, like food. And so what to do to fix the bonk. So real quick, I'm seeing a lot of chat going on, which is awesome. So quickly into the chat box, feel free to drop anything that you do to correct the bonk. We're going to talk a lot about preventing the bonk. The whole rest of the workshop is about preventing it. And so we're going to do it real quick, just address what do you do to fix bonking? Salt, goose, sugar, liquid, lots of it. Snickers, eat, drink, hydrate, peanut butter, liquid IV, Gatorade, eat something else, Nunes, beer, salt pickles, salty pickles, Gatorade, calories, eat before I'm hungry, fats, protein, fluids, Mexican Coke, paydays, each every 15 minutes. Yes, you all are on it. Preventing the bonk. If you've bonked, eat and drink simple carbs and water, and electrolytes would be an addition to that water piece. And so basically, we have bonked because we have run out of the readily available fuel to burn for energy, or we have not provided our bodies with the hydration and the electrolytes that it needs to be hydrated. And so the most quick fix to this, like there's a long-term solution after this, and that's to stay on top of all of these things, which we'll talk about. But the quick solution is everything you all just listed: sugars, salts, water. Okay. So we're going to go into how much food. Hopefully you read this and you're like, wow, what on earth is she going to talk about? What a personal thing, because it is. And so I'm not going to talk about calories or grams of food down to the exact number, because we are all individual people with our own nutritional needs that are very much based on our genetics, our body size, our fitness. And so as a full disclaimer for this whole workshop, none of this substitutes professional, legitimate nutritional advice. Sports nutritionists are wonderful resources, just like cycling coaches are or physical therapists are. And I would highly recommend seeking those resources for finding out your own not individualized needs. But everything I'm going to talk about are based on systems and strategies that have been tried and true, proven to work for me and the students that I have worked with. So when we're talking about how much food, I'm going to talk about 3 systems. First, we're bikepacking, so we need our baseline nutritional needs, which could be simply broken into 3 real meals a day, which generally are breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which would be the amount to meet what you would normally eat on a day-to-day basis, not factoring in the fact that you're riding 3 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, whatever it is that day. These are just like 3 substantial real meals. The next layer on that are your ride snacks. What is it that you need to eat while out riding in order to fuel that ride? And then really importantly, give yourself enough food to not dig yourself into a nutritional hole that sets you back for the next day. And that's one of the big things that is really important, and that I see a lot of people making errors while bikepacking, is not thinking about the next day. Because we can actually get through with really depriving ourselves and kind of skate through, like you might bonk. Maybe you'll bonk a couple times, but you'll probably make it to your destination. But the next day is when you'll really feel that deficit. And so when we talk about ride snacks, we're talking about eating enough to definitely give yourself enough food for completing that ride so that you're not in a deficit the next day. 4-number range. I know some people really want numbers. And so this is, again, not medical or nutritional advice. This is just like a range that you can think about, that you can be like, oh, I wonder where I fall in this. And then to go after this workshop and do more research to find out what it is that you need. For most people, a range of 200 to 400 calories an hour per hour of riding is a target. That, like I said, is hugely going to depend on your fitness and how you're currently trained. It's going to depend on how your gut is trained. And if you're used to eating, it's going to depend on your body size. It's going to depend on the intensity level your ride is compared to your fitness. So there are a lot of variables here. And this is just a baseline starting point. And if it highlights anything, it's that actually that adds up to a lot. And I will happily share that for me, I'm often at that, as a 5'2" smaller person, I'm often at that higher end. And it's because eating is my mountain superpower, and that's what lets me actually go far and stay energized and recover well each day. And then the final category I think is often underestimated because it's pretty obvious, that you should probably eat dinner, maybe some lunch. Like breakfast is a good way to start the day, and that you need food to be out pedaling. But one thing, when thinking about that long game for bikepacking of wanting to have energy the next day, and then the next day, and then possibly even the following week, is setting your body up for recovering overnight and when we're just off the bike. And so something that you can do, we'll talk about nutrients in a moment, but is plan on having another meal. And that would be the recovery meal right when you're done riding. And that not only creates another opportunity to help replenish that deficit that you have created while pedaling, but it also is an opportunity to give yourself some nutrients that like you might not be prioritizing while pedaling, like protein. And then often, like, it is pretty natural to finish a ride and find yourself hungry and for dinner to not be for another couple hours. So it helps pace yourself so that you then actually can eat a good amount at dinner as well. And you don't have to feel like you have so much that you have to eat that you can't eat enough at dinner. It's honestly one of my favorite meals. There, as you can see, I love sitting down at camp and looking at a map and eating a snack or small meal. So moving on to the nutrients. Again, it is pretty hard to talk to a huge group of people with all sorts of potential dietary needs and tell them what they should think about eating. And so I'm not here to prescribe any sort of diet or nutrition plan or food philosophy. I am just here to share some things to think about to help you remain energized so that you can be unlimited in the mountains. And again, like if you have dietary preferences or allergies or a nutrition philosophy or values that don't work with this, then I highly encourage working with a professional to identify how to make this all work. But there are two things that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about what kinds of food to be planning and then packing and then purchasing along the way. First is nutritious food. I think that there is a kind of glorified idea or romanticized idea that bikepackers eat out of gas stations. And yeah, bikepackers can definitely eat out of gas stations, and it's often a very common place to resupply. And that doesn't mean that just chips or just gummy worms are going to provide your body with everything it needs to perform at its best and to recover day after day. I'm sure that there are people out there who could prove that wrong or have great stories about racing the Tour Divide on just gummy bears and it going great. And if that's you, good, you do you. And the approach that I'd like to share is more of one that's holistic and balanced, based on giving our bodies the nutrients that they need for full body function. And that's all the macronutrients, which are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Carbohydrates are generally pretty easy to find and to pack and they're often something we naturally want because they do provide energy. When we were just talking about bonking, it's everyone's advice in this chat was sugar, sugar, sugar. And so when we think about carbs, both complex carbs and simple carbs, they are ultimately one of the nutrients that is being converted to energy. And with that bonk, and why my nutritionist Kyle was like, if you're feeling grumpy, eat, is because our brain also uses these nutrients for brain function. And so it is true that when we start to be like, feel low, feel grumpy, the word hangry, if anyone's heard that, the combination of hungry and angry, that is a symptom of that like just need of more carbs. So our brains can respond. Fats play a huge role as well for a couple of reasons for bikepackers. One, they provide a more slow burn if you're thinking about like a furnace. And they, depending on your fitness level and how your body is adapted to endurance exercise, they can provide a great deal of burnable energy, which reduces our needs for some of the quicker carbs. And then they also, notably, what I think is often overlooked is that they also keep our gut happy. And I'm not going to go into the deep dive of why, but essentially, if you think about kind of that gut bomb or gut rot that happens if you only eat gummy bears or goos or just liquid calories, like just sugars, there's this thing that's like endurance gut that's just like sloshy, ill. And having some fat in your diet can actually help prevent that. And it helps our stomachs digest all the carbs that we're eating as well. And we'll talk more about this balance of why fats are also our friends bikepacking in a moment. But then to just wrap up our three macronutrients, proteins are essential for a number of functions. And the maybe primary one we're thinking about in the context of bikepacking is just recovery and repair. And proteins can be, your protein needs can be met in a variety of ways, but it is one that it takes some intention. So, and again, there are all sorts of philosophies out there as far as like how much of this or that, and we're not going to go into that tonight because it is so individualized. But if you think about packing food for those three macronutrients, then you're in a great place. The next quality of kinds of food, in addition to nutritious, is efficient. And that is thinking about the fact that other than when we're sitting down at a restaurant or at a store and eating in that moment, we're carrying our food. And so the food that we're carrying, we're thinking about the weight of it and the bulk of it. And I have run into a number of bikepackers who are really concerned about the weight to the point that they're prioritizing weight over nutrition. And what I want to identify is that fats are actually going to be pretty heavy in general. Like if you think about oil, like just pure oil, it's going to be pretty heavy. Like a plastic jar of coconut oil is going to have some heft to it. But the amount of calories and energy that provides is really high as well. But then there are some foods like an apple that is also pretty heavy and it's nutritious to an extent, but it has a lot of water weight. And so there isn't like a rule that I have at least for how much weight to calories I want to be packing, but I am just being mindful of the fact that like heavier, denser foods are fine to carry. I'm perfectly happy carrying a jar of peanut butter because that is a lot of energy. And I'm also perfectly happy carrying some tortillas because those are a really good source of carbs. But they're denser compared to maybe bagels, which would be, or like a bag of popcorn, very light, but pretty low in the caloric density. And then when we're thinking about the bulk as well, there's that factor. And for being a small person, I think about the bulk of my food a lot because I have very limited space. And then depending on your setup, you might have more room for things like bagels or popcorn, but it's just something to be aware of when you're selecting your food. So we talked about those three kind of food systems of meal, snacks, and a recovery meal. So we're going to go through these. Why bikepacking meals? Like you can certainly ride a route without any meal planning. Like you can just live off of snacks and get through your bikepacking route. And I have done that. I rode the Great Divide route without a stove and basically ate snacks. Like the extent of my meal, other than a couple of restaurants, was a sandwich. And while it works, it's harder to ensure that you're getting enough food doing that. And so when you at least mentally break down your food strategy to have meals included, that is a really good way to ensure that your caloric needs are met. And so there's really three different ways to have meals when bikepacking. There's the restaurant store meals, like those that you sit down and you eat at the place. And those are great because they are right there and you don't have to carry any of it. It's a great way to have fresh food, fresh vegetables and fruit, meat if you eat meat. Um, and a huge plate of food. It's also a great way to have something either really cold or really hot, depending on what the environment is and what you're needing. And you will pay for that. As we know, restaurants are generally more expensive. You can achieve this out of stores as well, you know, the hot bar, the sushi, or the bagged salads, or the just walk through the store and build yourself a big sandwich and eat it right there. You can also plan a trip around this and not need to carry cooking gear because you're just eating at restaurants. And that does dictate the itinerary because you need to be able to stop at restaurants or stores at a regular interval. And then there's the to-go meals, which would be taking things that are prepared and bringing them with you, carrying them with you to eat at camp. And those can be great because again, they're already prepared. You can eat things that would be harder to eat to make while bikepacking, like pizza, one of my favorites. Or a full big burrito, you know, like burritos are definitely doable bikepacking, but you probably won't be getting all the ingredients you'd get in a giant burrito from Chipotle or something. Um, and if time is a concern, or you're not bringing cooking gear again, then that's a way to get those nutrients. Um, then the last one, which are, I think, despite loving pizza, my personal favorite, the bikepacking cooking meal options. And those are the meals that you prepare yourself. Um, there's a lot of different ways to do these. The post workshop PDF that I send out is going to have a lot of menu ideas and some recommendations for making your own meals in the field. I personally think that this is one of the most treasured times I get. Like I love riding my bike, but I really love camping. And I think that's one of the main reasons I love bikepacking is I get to go camping. And so making food is a way to share just the day and sit down and enjoy the location with the people I'm bikepacking with and enjoy a hot meal. Um, both the these can either be really instant, like pour hot water over a freeze-dried meal, or pour hot water over instant food, like instant potatoes, instant rice, or they can be more elaborate. And this is very parallel to backpacking style meals. And so there's really an endless internet resource out there of ultra fuel efficient, ultra light meals to really more deluxe, for lack of gourmet, backpacking meals. And they honestly can be done very much on a budget. I would argue that this could be one of the least expensive ways to eat, and it could also be pretty expensive if you're just shopping like really high quality freeze-dried meals. Lastly, last note on this is I think this is probably the most dialed way to have the lightest and most compact bike, like packed bike setup, because you really get to narrow down and like dial in what you're packing. So quickly in the chat, on that note, if you cook or prepare meals, this could include freeze-dried meals, what are some of your favorite meals to prepare in the backcountry while bikepacking? And this can be for breakfast, for lunch, if you like to cook lunch, or dinner. Yeah, ramen. The walking taco. And remember, all this is going out. This chat will be linked. And so for a list of ideas, you'll be able to refer to this chat for ideas. And I saw something in the chat about wondering about the PDF at the later this week, probably Friday, you'll get an email with the live recording, a PDF with a lot of additional resources that won't be covered as deeply, or they're just additional supplementary resources. And this amazing chat with all these ideas for food, many of which are new to me. I'm excited. I'm actually going bikepacking next week, so maybe I'll get to try some of these. And so here's my list of just some of my off the top of my head go-to favorite bikepacking meals over the years. All of these will be shared in that PDF as well, so no need to screenshot or write down or anything. This is just my way of sharing some of the things I think about. The oatmeal and granola are really natural, easy things to think about for breakfast. Grits is a great way to mix it up and have a savory breakfast. You can actually find instant grits. I like, especially when resupplying, I love pastries and adding some nut butter for those carbs and fats and proteins. And then I think so maybe a little ridiculous, but I think my favorite meal, because of how simple it is and delicious, are just instant potatoes, smoked salmon, and cheese and salt stirred together. And super simple, pretty light, and really nutritious and filling. Another favorite one for me, that's a no-cook meal, which is great for the day after a resupply or on a trip if you don't have food, is a bikepacker charcuterie. And that's sometimes the day that I'll carry something that includes like an avocado or a bell pepper or the apple, where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to carry this for half a day and then we get to eat it. But it's a way of adding some of that fresh, watery crunch. And then with that are all the things like bread and cheese and crackers and some meats and olives, like all sorts of yummy things. And I mean, I eat that at home for dinner sometimes too. Okay. Next, snacks. Oh, we could go on forever about snacks. But when we're thinking about snacks, we're thinking about those two primary energy giving macronutrients, carbs and fats. And as we talked about, a balance of both is great for our brain and gut happiness, and for that long, slow burning energy and that quick energy, all together preventing bonking. When we're thinking about snacking, which is just eating, like eating on your bike, eating while riding, eating while pulling up your map, eating while stopped at a junction, eating while, maybe not while you take a bathroom break, but at the same time after you washed your hands. The best thing that you can do for preventing those bonks is to teach your body to digest food while you're pedaling and moving, and to not have to have like a 15-minute break every 45 minutes in order to have a snack, but to be able to eat 100 calories every 15 minutes. And then that way you're providing that constant amount of food. And when you're thinking about that, then like what snacks are actually easy to eat at regular intervals? Um, this is just a list of what I could fill on a page of things that I often pack while bike packing to have variety. Variety is the spice of life, if you didn't know, that plus salt. And then the next slide are snacks that you could eat either before departing or while you're resupplying. And we're going to talk about this in the water section as well, and resupplying section. We're going to talk about it 3 times. But when resupplying, whether stopping quickly at a gas station or at a going through town and buying food for the next couple days or day even, this is a great opportunity to just eat something and drink something so that you are using that stop as an opportunity to give yourself um the energy from food that you don't have to carry in that moment. And with the resupply, there's an opportunity to eat things that are different than just the chips and the bars and the pastries and the cookies that you've been eating for the last morning or full day or week. And so my all-time favorite thing for this stop is yogurt. I think that is my go-to mid-ride snack. I just love that it's cold, generally sweet, it has protein, and I think I said cold already. I like the texture. It's one of my favorite foods. But ice cream, Mexican Coke, someone mentioned, that's one of my favorite things to just like have right there. And most likely I'm not carrying these things with me afterwards. I might rebottle a Coke into my water bottle or stash a yogurt into my backpack. I have done that, but this is a great opportunity to have those things that provide energy for as you finish that, you get on your bike and keep pedaling and you feel like $1,000,000. You're probably pedaling harder up the hill leaving town than you would have on your way into town. Um, and then the recovery meal snack for people who are conscious of the amount of protein they're consuming for recovery purposes. It can be challenging to meet these in bikepacking settings. A couple tricks are to bring your little recovery drink mix or after your ride. As long as it's not for packed for weeks on end, like that could be a valuable use of weight and space to have things like cheese and crackers, to make a little taco, PB&J. Like we don't have to get perfect with our sports nutrition, but just anything that just like signals to our body that we're done exercising and it's time to repair and recover, that maybe pairs well with a hydrating drink of choice and helps get some calories on board after that ride before you make dinner. My favorite one, if I'm in town doing this, is chocolate milk, or sometimes I'll carry a chocolate milk out to camp if I resupplied like that afternoon. Do that at your own risk. Milk goes bad. Um, so on the resupply note, resupplies. We talked a bit about resupplies in the first webinar when thinking about planning your route and your logistical strategy. And there's a lot to consider when selecting your route and the resupply availability, because resupplies hugely dictate how much stuff, how much food and water you have to carry and fuel. Um, when and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but when I think about what I'm packing for a trip, it my base kit as far as the camping gear, the clothing systems, like those don't change a ton. The thing that makes the biggest difference in how much room I have on my bike is how much food and water I have to carry. And so when I'm planning my route, thinking about how far is it in between resupplies for both water and food is huge in figuring out if I can actually do that with the bike setup that I have. Um, if it's And then also what my food strategy would be as far as like, what am I going to pack and how many meals am I going to plan to make and what will that actually look like? I'd say resupplies are especially helpful when getting into bike packing because they give you a lot of margin for figuring out how much food do you need. And maybe you actually need more food to be pedaling a heavier bike than you anticipated. And having more resupply options gives you that flexibility for realizing that and adapting and packing more for the next leg of your trip. Um, I think the main thing when thinking about a resupply, whether it's going into a trip or being while you're out riding and knowing you have a resupply coming up the next day or that day, is to make sure you have a plan. Um, this includes knowing when stores are open, and also having a rough idea of what they will offer. You know, if you're really flexible as far as your diet and needs go, great. You can go with the just chips and gummy worms approach. And if you have more specific dietary goals for what you're trying to get from that resupply, it will be worth your due diligence to do the research ahead of time to know what you can get. I have often found myself packing just the base ingredients for like my dinners and breakfasts and then resupplying snacks in more remote resupply places where like it's just harder to find like instant rice or dehydrated beans, things like that. Um, Before you resupply, make sure you assess your itinerary and your food needs and then make a list. Like a list can go a really long way and just making sure that you get both the amount of things of food you need and also the kinds of things that you need. But the amount is really important and that can be really daunting. Like figuring out how many hours of pedaling you have and how many breakfasts and how many dinners, it all ends up taking quite a bit of bikepacker math. And I tend to make a lot of bikepacker math error, especially when I'm doing it while pedaling or while wandering around a store. And then during the resupply, buy intentional quantities. This is where if you're bikepacking with other people, think about like, can you share things? Can you like if you have this large bag of granola, but you only need one breakfast, who else can eat granola? So you're not carrying a 6 serving bag and you're gonna eat half of it. Because let's be honest, probably eating 3 servings or at least for breakfast. Um, Consider the weight and value of those items, like we had talked about. Perishability, like when are you going to eat this item? Avocados are amazing, as are apples, and when they're bouncing around on your bike, they're going to get bruised and then be a lot less appetizing. I can also tell you that I have given myself and my bikepacking partners food poisoning before due to keeping ham in my backpack against my sweaty back for too many days. Um, and so those are all personal decisions and risks that we incur, but just be mindful of those things. While resupplying, thinking about repackaging and cleaning up your trash while we're doing this. Like we are bikepacking through other people's homes, and there are people who own these businesses that we are depending on. And just when they see these setups come through, we want them to be excited because we're bringing money to their economies, not because we're taking a shower in their sink and then leaving our stuff all over the place, including our trash. But repackaging can be a great strategy for um, increasing the efficiency of what you're buying by having more space for things. And lastly, eat something opportunistic like yogurt or ice cream. So this is our last slide on the food topic, and this is just when we think about space and food packing. My main There's no right or wrong place to put food. I would say on that avocado apple note that if you can when you put things against your back, whether it's an apple and an avocado or a camera, it's less likely to bounce in the way that a bike does because our bodies naturally provide suspension and padding. But this these images are to show kind of how our bike setups change, not depending on the gear necessarily, although there are some obvious differences in environments in these pictures, but more the amount of food needed in between trips. So real quick, on the lower left, we have this gravel bike. This bike is set up for an overnighter on gravel roads where there was one night out and lunch was in town. And so very little food needed to be carried. Over in the middle, this is a 5-day trip on a trail bike. However, there were resupplies every day. And so I carried a backpack in order to ensure that I had room for my layers on my tiny, extra small, full suspension bike, but I also didn't have to have a ton of room for food. This bike over here had room for 2 gallons of water and 4 days of food without resupply. And so you see a seat bag and panniers, and on a medium frame, a really large frame bag. This bike in the upper right-hand corner was packed for a 4-day trip. With shared meal plans were shared with other people who are carrying similar rigs. There was a resupply on the 3rd day, I think just for snacks, and water was pretty plentiful. This group of people is just to show on a 3 or 4-day trip on mountain bikes how in cold weather, how backpacks are really key for adding that additional volume for the food and clothes you need. And then lastly, we have the winter expedition of a lot of food needs to be carried. I think this was 6 days of food and a lot of gear, although very little water because you melt water. And so, are there any questions on the food topic before we move into the second half of this, which is water? The bear situation. Okay, so questions. Noelle is sick, and so I'm going to read these. How do you force yourself to eat if not hungry? That is a really good question. It is actually very common for people when undergoing endurance exercise to have a suppressed appetite. And then it's also very common to feel slightly nauseous by the thought of food. So there are a couple things to think about. One, like, is that environmental that's causing that? For me, heat will often make my stomach a lot more sensitive. And so the idea of eating like really dry food, like dry cookies or crackers, it would actually make me feel like I might vomit. And so trying to bring foods that are more not necessarily liquidy and hydrating, but just like have that texture that is easier to swallow. And then drinking electrolytes with my food, like put a bite in, chase it with water, helps me a lot. I think that it's also really helpful training your gut and your mind to get used to just like eating steadily rather than a lot at once is a huge way to help yourself not get into a place of feeling so anti-food internally that you can't manage to eat it. And so that's where like having a couple of bites every 10 to 15 minutes will help it not feel like as daunting of a task as eating like a 400-calorie snack every hour. And I think the only other thing with that is it's really helpful to end up in those places because through those experiences, you learn what doesn't work for you and then what does. And so I tend to, especially for me in those like hotter situations, I tend to carry like bonk or backup food. And that's like something that I'm holding on to for like it's extra in that case that I need to help myself get back on board nutritionally. Do you have a sports nutritionist you can recommend for bike pack racing? Um, yeah, I can include that in the chat afterwards. I work with Kyle Pfaffenbach. I don't even think I say his last name right, but I've been working with him for 6 years. He's fantastic, and I can include some other people that I'm aware of. Um, okay, any devices track calorie needs based on miles and elevation. So that's a good one, like a nutritionist can help you identify your own base needs, and not but, and a lot of devices, whether they're cycling computers, like cycling computers can guesstimate based on your weight and then the distance and elevation. They'll have like an algorithm for figuring that out. And then once you incorporate like heart rate or power, so like a sports watch, which does heart rate, like they're going to start to calculate with a little bit more accuracy. And then I think that the thing to know is that like those are devices. They're computers basically, and they are great tools. And if anything, for me, they're like reminders to keep eating. And I have experimented a lot with the how much I need, and I can go more by like visually be like, this is what I need for an hour of like this kind of riding. And so the more you integrate your bike packing fueling strategy while out riding on your day trips, the more of an awareness you'll have for what you need. Food storage. Curious if folks are keeping food packed separate and are bringing bare bags for camp. That's a great question. I'm going to talk more of this in camps. The workshop that is in March on bike packing skills around camping. And that's where we'll talk more about wildlife proofing, but it is relevant here because of food. I think the main thing with bears is depending on what kind of bear habitat you're in, that will dictate what food storage strategy you use. Some places will require hanging your food. Some places require, unfortunately, bear canisters. Some places will allow you to use sacks. For bike packers, a bear hang, as long as there are trees and you know how to set up a bear hang properly, they're really easy to do because bags like handlebar bags or seat bags or your backpack can be the bag that hangs, and then just about a 50-foot cord length of P cord will work for that bear hang. And so that's a very easy way to manage that as long as that meets any requirements for the land that you're camping on. And then for other critters, often they're just as problematic, like ravens who can open backpacks and zippers, mice and other rodents, squirrels, and even other creatures like fox can be nuisances. And I think the strategies that I employ when I'm camping outside of bear habitat, but just thinking about critters, is I store my food in my bike and I do not sleep right next to my bike. And I know that that sounds really basic, but it is really common for people to leave their bike bags open, to sleep with their food in their backpack under their head or right next to their shoulder. And I think that just securing your food into a bag, keeping it inside your bike, and keeping that away from your camp, and this is not bear camping, this is just critter camping, is a great way to just do your best at securing your food while also not having it right at your body. Okay, Noelle, I'm wondering if I have any other questions. Sending yourself packages. Okay. Yeah, that is a great question. And that is something that can be used if you know that there are post offices where you can send yourself general delivery. That's generally the easiest in the country that you're in or in the country that you can speak the language. I've tried to use this system in countries I don't speak the language and have had a really hard time finding my packages or sending my packages to the place I think I'm going. In the US, at least, general delivery is a common utilized resource for through hikers and through bikepackers, like on the Great Divide mountain bike route, on the Western Wildland route, on the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, Continental Divide Trail. And those are great ways to basically do all your packing ahead of time and make sure that you have the food that you want. I think it's best when you can kind of send yourself the dry goods you need and then resupply the more fresh foods like the cheeses and if you want any fruit or veggies, like anything that could be perishable. It's also a good way to send fuel to locations where you would not otherwise be able to resupply fuel. You just have to ship it in a certain way. And the main thing and the challenge with these is that you have to be ready for post office hours. A lot of really small town post offices have very limited hours. Okay, I think, okay, I just took we'll call that the question period for this section. And if you have any more food related questions that I didn't get to, we will have a Q&A at the end of this that we can come back to these. But
Yeah, there's just a few in the Q&A.
okay,
If you can see
so
that, but
in the Q&A, yes.
are you able to pop that open?
Yes. Okay, keto type 2 diabetic. That is a great question, and I do not have personal experience or good recommendations for that. I would imagine that a nutritionist could help with that a lot. Does caffeine help the body metabolize fat faster or sooner? I understand that helps the body extend carbohydrates longer to avoid the bonk. I do not, I'm not aware of caffeine helping the body metabolize fat faster or sooner. Um, and I think the main, and then as far as mentally with caffeine, like our bodies can like adapt to caffeine. And so if you want the greatest effects of caffeine, you should actually take a break from it and then reintroduce it. But I don't, yeah, I can't speak too much to that as a strategy beyond bringing pure joy through a morning beverage and that the added brain function. Um, I'm curious how you personally adjust your macros depending on the length of the event when racing. So for me personally, when I'm racing my bike for long distances, whether it's bike packing or really long day events, I go on a grams of carbs per hour strategy, knowing that by eating real foods, I am getting fat in my diet. And so I don't intentionally track how much fat I'm consuming. I just know that I will be getting it through eating real food in addition to sports drinks, gels, goo, like chews type things. And my strategy is generally around 80 grams of carbs an hour. And that is based on it working for me. And then how do you handle the increase in calories in relationship to fiber content? That's a good question too. So we do need fiber in our diets. That's one of the reasons that like eating real food and finding real meals is good, especially on longer trips. And when we're thinking about like our food that's fueling our pedaling, like the ride snacks, lower fiber foods are going to be your friend there because they are going to be more readily converted to glycogen or energy in your muscles. And then I personally would like, because I'm probably not going to be making a salad while I'm bikepacking or just eating like a smoothie every morning, like I think the limitations of what you can carry and what makes sense calorically and weight and space wise to pack, like our the bikepacking diet naturally is reduced in fiber. And then I just make sure, especially on longer trips, to have a salad occasionally and like to eat fruit when I'm resupplying in town. Um, and I just try not to load up on that stuff in my gut when I'm about to go pedal a lot. I try to do that in the afternoon or at night. Okay, awesome. You all are so engaged. It's so nice to have an engaged online audience. Okay, water is life. So we could have started with this because it's one of the most basic things, um, but it's coming second for no reason because it made sense in my head as a progression. So we're going to start with first, where can we get water when bikepacking? In the chat, feel free to drop your favorite water sources. and I'm going to drink some water. Fresh mountain streams, creeks, cattle trough. Oh, it's a favorite. That's impressive. Springs, churches. Yep. Flowing streams. And the water you carry, piped springs, moving water, glaciers, beer. Yep, that's water source with side effects. Fire stations. Yep. Oh, findaspring.com. Nice. I haven't used that website. Churches. Yeah. Awesome. Feel free to keep dropping these in. I'm going to start sharing an overview of places to find water. So, water is going to be potentially, most likely, one of the heaviest things you're carrying. If you were to just roughly say you're going to drink a gallon a day, which is not a recommendation for any reason, it's just a very easy quantity to imagine if you're, at least you're in the US and not on the metric system, that's 8 pounds. And so then suddenly, if you need to carry 2 gallons, like it was in one of those bikes, that's 16 pounds of water. And if you are riding a bike with 16 pounds of water through creeks over and over again, then you're missing an opportunity to be saving yourself a lot of energy and a lot of space on your bike, and potentially a lot of fun because your bike isn't as playful or maneuverable by resupplying your water. So yes, in certain places, especially some other countries, like you do need to be able to carry your water from purified source to purified source. And there's a lot of opportunities in many locations around the world to be getting water along the way. And so the first one would be spigots and faucets after leaving your home. And those could be at stores. Churches were referenced a lot, like other public or community spaces that are generally open and are generally welcoming to people just coming and getting water. There are some places where you have to pay for tap water or pay for bottled water. But yeah, that can look like anything from your average grocery store or restaurant or gas station or church to spigots found out in other out in like campgrounds um or like pipe springs. Like in Europe there's a lot of pipe springs. Whether or not you treat this water coming out of the spigot, that hugely depends on the situation. You know, a lot of tap water in the US is just good to drink as is, and some of it is clearly recommended to not. I'd say, and then when in doubt, like in this situation where there's just a spigot coming up from the ground in a cow field, err on, use your judgment, but I'll be treating it. The main thing to know about these spigots, whether they're inside a building and that's operating, or they're outside, is just to know what the hours of operation are and if they're on all year round. Most like Forest Service style spigots at campgrounds get shut off in the winter, even down in the Southwest, because of the risk of freezing pipes. So this is where planning ahead and preparing comes into play. You do need to do some research for knowing what water sources are going to be reliable. The next one, and these aren't in any special order. Springs, this is one of my personal favorites because it's where water is just coming up from out of the ground. It is often the beginning of a water source. That doesn't mean that it's pure and doesn't need to be treated. We'll talk more about treating in a little bit, but it is often it's often generally cool, generally lacks sediment, generally doesn't have like a lot of other stuff growing in it. And for me personally, having spent a lot of time in the Southwest, they just feel really special. When planning on springs, thinking about if they're perennial or if they're ephemeral, like do they flow year round or do they only flow during certain seasons? And then are these springs that when they flow year round, will they flow year round even if the area is in a drought, or will they dry up if the region is experiencing below average precipitation? Creeks can look like anything from that last picture. It was technically a creek below the spring to something bigger like this. And then suddenly we're defining creeks versus rivers, depending on where you are in the world. The name will depend on who did the mapping and naming of places, but they could also be called draws, streams, ditches, canals. And again, creeks can be ephemeral or perennial. They can dry up seasonally. They can be intermittent, where they flow in some locations, then go underground and then pop back out again. That's really exciting. And then some and many creeks do flow year round. And again, these will often depend, especially geographically, on the season, as far as like if the region if the watershed's at average precipitation or not. And yeah, I'm going to talk more about these in a moment for determining reliability. Rivers. Rivers can look anything like the beautiful, wild and scenic free-flowing Salmon River on the left here, that despite it looking a little green in the picture is actually quite clear, to the also beautiful but very sediment-filled San Juan River in the Four Corners region on the right. Both are water. Ponds, lakes, and earthen tanks. These would be contained bodies of water. Obviously anything from gigantic, like the Great Lakes, to really tiny ponds that could even dry up depending on the time of year. An earthen tank would just be like it would look like a pond or a lake that has clearly had, or maybe not clearly, depending on how long it's been there, but just like little natural dirt dams that create the lake shape or pond shape. Someone's favorite, the cattle/wildlife tanks and troughs. These also can have huge variety in being appetizing or not. In some parts of the country, excuse me, these are critical for bikepackers having reliable water. And in those parts of the country, bikepackers really have to learn to embrace them. Fortunately, the one on the right that is pure green is not what I would call average, but it is possible, and that is water that I found and drank after filtering it. And then the one in the upper left is a more common looking southwestern cattle tank. And then the one on the lower left is actually a really cool rainwater catchment system tank that is filling a wildlife tank on the Arizona Trail, installed by the Arizona Trail Association. And there is a spigot for through hikers and through bikers and equestrians to use. Potholes. I think I've already said a couple favorites, but this is another one of my favorites. I think because they feel really special, but these would just be natural depressions in slick rock that are containing water. And in some landscapes, these are a critical water source to being able to refill water. And as you can probably imagine, are very seasonal and require quite a bit of research and geographic knowledge. And then lastly, not super common bikepacking, but definitely if you are bikepacking in the winter in the snowy landscape, snow is a water source and just requires a lot of fuel to turn that snow into water. So when identifying these, as you can probably imagine, having gone through that list of water sources, we're not really just taking our water bottles and wandering through the landscape and wondering if there's water out there. There's the best way to have success with carrying the amount of water that you need and not too much more, and I hopefully not less, is doing a lot of research on your route ahead of time. And I would say these days, with how extensive well-published routes are, there's a lot of opportunities for bikepackers to not have to do a ton of water research, because well-published routes are going to include things like on this lower left-hand side, there'll be water POIs or waypoints, points of interest or waypoint on the route file that say things like last guaranteed water supply until a motto, 43 miles. And so this person, Sarah Swallow, has done your homework for you by telling you that this water is guaranteed and there isn't any more for 43 miles. On this left-hand side, there's a shot of a route, and you can't, nothing's highlighted, but if these water sources don't have that amount of detail that is telling you what kind of water source it is and how reliable it is, then it takes a lot more research to figure out, is it reliable? Is it seasonal? Is the region in like having a precipitation year that is likely to mean that this is going to be flowing? On the Bikepacking Routes website, we have an interactive route map that does have a layer that shows the regions that you're looking at, recent precipitation levels, and if that's above, at, or below average levels, which is quite helpful. But some things that you can do to do that research, in addition to first looking at your route for waypoints and POIs. Some routes, especially, or those that are popular, like the Arizona Trail or the Western Wildland route, there are apps through like gut hook apps where there's going to be kind of a water forum, and people can update water sources and let you know the status of them. And that gets timestamped with a date. And then that's information for you to be able to say like, oh, well, a week ago, this was flowing. And then that's really good feedback for you to know. If not all routes, though, only a handful really have that. So additional things you can do is look at the USGS map layer, which websites and apps like Ride with GPS in this upper right-hand corner where I'm circling you. Oh, sorry. You can see I've selected the USGS scan. And that is going to show a topo map with water sources that are on it. And the thing to know about these is this is a starting point, because most of these maps are dated back in the 70s or 80s, and so it's pretty old data as far as like, and it doesn't tell you if a spring is ephemeral or perennial. They will tell you if a creek is intermittent or continuous, but that's based on that certain year that they did that mapping. But it's a starting point for being able to look at a map, and if you have map reading skills of being able to read a topographic map and knowing the symbols, then it's a great place to be able to look around and be like, where could there be water? And then from there, you can take where there could be water to doing more research with land managers or outfitters or other people who have ridden the route to find out if that source is reliable. But looking on this map here, there's a symbol here for springs. Over here, there are wetlands. There is a very short, as far as elevation that it runs, creek. And so that's one that I'd probably be like, I'm not going to rely on that. That's like only 200 feet or 300 feet long in elevation. There's a lake that looks like it's likely to have water. And then there's a very long canyon over here called Ash Canyon that is descending thousands of feet, which would be more likely to have water than maybe that tiny one going into the wetland. So this is really just a plug on developing your topographic map reading skills as a skill for bikepacking, not only for navigation, but also for starting to being able to interpret the 2D landscape to anticipate where there's water in the 3D landscape. And then I think that in the age of the internet, at the route forums like on Facebook, or if there are other forums out there that I'm not aware of, where and asking people that you've heard of either by reading their trip report, like, hey, what was this water source like? What time of year did you ride it? Would you consider this reliable or just a possible source? And then lastly, do this research and market so that it turns into valuable information for when you're out there. And that's where once you're out riding, like you have the research for where have you the research done for where water could be and is promised to be, and being able to find it in person is generally straightforward, but first that requires having really accurate waypoints for navigation, because some water sources, like if you imagine the size of a spigot or this location of a spring in the context of a pin on the map, and how if on your map, if you're a little bit off, that could actually lead to quite the scavenger hunt for that spigot or a spring. Rivers are going to be more obvious, but, or like a pothole, but, and then that also comes into, just being willing to take the time to look around. If there is a water source that's promised to be there, like it's going to be there, but it might take turning on a couple different faucets, walking around a number of different cattle tanks, um, studying the landscape as you're riding and being able to be like, okay, well, that little strip is green and there's water flowing here. And so that probably means that there's going to be water, like maybe a little bit more water downstream or whatnot. So I think that for me, one of the things that I love about multi-day travel is how I can really start to learn a landscape, and by paying attention, start to learn things that help me understand how to improve my own experience in that landscape. Okay, how much water? Similar to food, we have systems, or yeah, and they're three. They're different than food, but they're similar. First, there's the amount of water that you need to stay hydrated for being alive for the day. And that's when I'm similar to those meals, I'm thinking about the food that I'm gonna be, or the water that I'm going to be drinking when I wake up in the morning until I get on my bike, the water that I'm gonna be drinking maybe at a prolonged break, like at lunch, and then the water I'm going to be drinking at camp. How much that is depends on you and your body, and the climate and how you're acclimatized to that climate, which would both be the altitude and the temperature and the aridity. And so there's not going, even unlike food, there's not even going to be a number that I'm going to be recommending. Um, the next layer is how much water do you need to be remaining hydrated while you're riding? Remember back at the beginning, the bonk, part of that bonk is often linked to dehydration and a lack of electrolytes. And so thinking about when you're out pedaling, um, how much per hour do you need to be drinking in order to be feeling good on your bike, being able to pee during the day, those days where you don't pee during the day, like that's probably a red flag that you did not drink enough. And then lastly, the amount of water that you need for cooking and cleaning. And so if you are cooking and cleaning, that usually requires some amount of water. And when you're planning your food, we didn't talk about this, but when you're planning your food, thinking about water availability for cooking is huge. And so if you're able to camp at a water source, whether that's a spigot or a kettle tank, like that is allowing you to cook food that needs more water. Like pasta is one of the higher water need foods because it needs to be rehydrating, and it also needs to be like in a soup of water. Whereas rice requires just the amount of water that the rice needs to rehydrate. Um, but then something like a tasty bite doesn't really require water because there's already water in it, and you're actually carrying that water around. And so if you're dry camping, just thinking about how much water do I need? I'm going to have to carry that much water to camp in order to make this meal, and maybe planning a meal that doesn't need as much water. And then when we're thinking about how much water to carry between water sources, again, it takes bikepacker math, which we know we're not always great at while pedaling, or feeling in a rush. And so thinking ahead of time, being like, okay, at this water source, I have 20 miles until the next water source. And let's say that that's going to take me 3 hours plus stop time. So I'm going to plan on 4 hours. of water. And so based on my body, these conditions, etc., let's just say that that's going to be 2.5 liters. Making that up, that's not a recommendation. And so I'm going to carry at least 2.5 liters, not too much more, maybe a little bit more for the like, maybe it's afternoon and maybe you're a little behind and you should be drinking more. So that's one way to think about calculating water needs between sources. And then in our back in our plan ahead and prepare mindset, like this water thing is very much like a figuring out the problem or the equation you have to work with in your route planning phase and trip plan preparation phase, and then applying it. And so that how much water, that this last slide, the how much water do you need? This is all being thought about in the plan ahead and prepare and then revisited as you're out there. But oops, sorry. The planning water element of your capacity is thinking about like how much water capacity do I need on my bike? And that again comes back to that eternal question of, is this the right route for me? Do I have the ability to carry this much water? So before I talk anymore and give away the answer, I have a poll for you all, and that is, how much water capacity do I need for my bikepacking trip? Hmm. Y'all are doing great. This is a great time to drink water too. Oh, my water filter of choice. That is a really great question. It is coming up in the next slide. I'm seeing a comment also that if you're eating a lot of dry foods to conserve weight, you're going to go through a lot more water. You definitely don't want to skip on hydration. And it's a really good point as well. Like if we're eating, I mean, the most like hydrating food you can think of, like a smoothie, like, yeah, there's water content in that. But if we're just eating drier foods, like our bodies do need that to metabolize it and digest it. Okay. So the poll. Um, we're going to talk about why now, but the correct answer is not showing itself. There we go. D, the volume necessary to sustain my water needs between the farthest water sources. And that might be the amount of water you need for a full day. That might be 2 bottles. That might be the volume you always carry. And it might be the volume, hopefully it is the volume that also fits on your bike. But ultimately, what determines the volume of water that you carry should be the information you did in your route research, that is the amount of water that you need to carry between the farthest water sources. And then also on that is like, are you spending a night in between those farthest water sources? So it's not necessarily a distance as much it is as a time and a water need. Because if you have 30 miles between water sources, but you're riding straight there and you're not stopping, that's less water than you need as if there's 30 miles between water sources, but you're camping at mile 10 and you're cooking a meal. Thank you for participating in a poll. So water capacity and bikes, we're gonna this is a little bit back on the gear topic from the last webinar, but I want to revisit it because it's relevant. Um, sorry, Forrest, it's the slide after this, so we talk about filters more. Um, so hydration, like reservoirs or bladders, are really great ways to carry water quantity because as the water volume goes down, so does the space that the bladder is taking up. That would be like this in this picture. Some of those other pictures where I had a red MSR dromedary, they're basically flat and when they're empty, and then they fill up, and they're often, depending on, they're all different volumes. You can get 1 liter bladders, 2 liters, full 1 gallon, 2 gallons, like they're quite large. The thing to know about them is that they can puncture, and the closures is often a place where they would have problems. And so, these days the like MSR and HydroPack brands are really reliable, and then it comes down to, are you taking care of it? And so the best thing you can do is just treat this like it's a precious item, because it carries your water. And so, don't use it as a pillow. Don't lay it on the ground, just like out there on rocks and cactus. Pack it in a way that it's not just bouncing around abrading. And just do like a little function test of the seams and seals, caps, lids, whatever they have, before you leave, to make sure that those are all still working. Like those, when they have twist on caps, those can get cross threaded, or the seals can wear out and dry out, especially in arid climates. And so they can last a really long time if they're taken care of. And the main thing is just to be a good caretaker of your gear and pay attention to it. Um, that said, I do carry generally at least one water bottle as a backup if my bladder were to break. And then on long trips, I will also carry a spare closure, just like at the cap. Um, you can also get creative with ways to provide closure or fix things in a pinch. And in my repair kit, having like super glue, Gorilla tape, zip ties, even a little aqua seal, like the things that would actually help a puncture can go a long way in just like problem solving problems that have come up in the field. Should also say that water bottles aren't foolproof. Water bottles can fly off bikes and hit rocks and pop. And I say that from experience. That said, that can often be prevented by how you attach them to your bicycles. And so we can talk about that. Oftentimes, bike packing, the inner triangle of a bike is taken up with some sort of bag system. That doesn't mean you can't go bike packing with water bottle cages. I'm really envious of all of those who have big enough bikes to do that. But attaching water bottles to other parts of your bike is worth discussing, because it's also a risk management consideration, where when you're using these lower down tube attachments, whether it's like this bag that Revlate makes, inside this is a 1 liter Nalgene, or over on the lower right there's this water bottle cage, is making sure that if you have suspension, that you have the clearance through, when you go through all your travel in your suspension, to clear the top of the water bottle or the top of the bag. And then additionally, if you don't have a bike that has cage mounts on the fork, like pretty much all suspension forks don't, you need to mount these water bottles yourself. And you can see in this upper right hand corner, this one is mounted with, first there's electrical tape to protect my fork, and then there are hose clamps that are snugged down quite snugly, like really tight. You can also use like the super duper strongest possibly made zip ties as a way. And then in addition to that, I use either a Bole strap like here, or probably can't see it anywhere, like a little zip tie that pulls the metal of the water bottle cage snugger so that it's actually a very secure fit. I'm not reaching my hand down to my fork leg while it's moving to pull my water bottle out, nor am I reaching under my bike to pull my water bottle out. And so I want it to be secure, and then I'm going to stop and pull my water bottle out. So that, one, I'm not getting my hands in my wheels, and then two, I know that my water bottle is not just going to go flying out while I'm rocking down a bumpy Jeep road. Um, Otherwise, water, as we said, it's probably the heaviest thing we're carrying. And so thinking back to that packing your bike um element of the bikes and gear and packing workshop a month ago now, that water weight is going to be best served generally in the center of gravity for your bike. And so like that's this frame triangle below the frame. If you don't, I often have to carry a backpack, and that will be the only heavy thing I put in my backpack is a bladder. And for me and my back, generally 2 liters feels pretty manageable. A full gallon feels really uncomfortable. And that's just me and what I've learned. And then lastly, um, I do try to only have one water bottle on my fork. Especially mountain biking, find that my bike is a lot harder to maneuver and handle if there's more weight than that on my fork legs. However, on a road, I would definitely put another bottle on the other side of the fork. The last consideration is just when you have water bottles exposed on the down tube, like this lower right one, that is a great place for dirt and cow poop or anything else you ride through to fling up and be all over your water bottle. And so sometimes like this bag is a great way to carry an Nalgene. And then when I have water down here, I usually just don't even bother with the lid and I just store water in it and then I transfer it by unscrewing the cap and pouring it into a different water bottle or just drink out of it that way. And then I just wash my water bottles when I resupply so that I don't have to worry about it. And then just to add to this in response to a question I see from Forrest right now, there are bladders that go inside of frame bags. Revlate makes one that is about the size of the lower part of the frame bag. It's just a couple liters and it's small and so there's room for other bladders or other stuff, sorry, like food, gear. And then it sounds like there's also 3-liter Apidura bladders. And so I think that as far as it is great for storage and maximizing space. And my experience with having hoses running out of frame bags, which on this trip I actually did, and I'm sad that it's not showing here. I think I was probably just out of water. You can run a hose through this little black spot that's a hole into the frame bag meant for a hydration hose to come up and be able to reach. And it's actually really easy to pull water up in that way. Once you start the flow, there's just water in the line. As long as you just pack it in a way that there aren't any kinks in the hoses and like there's a natural gravity is natural. The bag is set up so that gravity is feeding the water down to the hose, if that makes sense. And then the last risk management thing, like you can see over here, there's a hose coming up, is a hose that comes out here is really well set up to fling into your tire or into your rim, or I'm sorry, into your spokes, which fortunately is probably not going to cause a crash. Hopefully it just like breaks before sending you over your bars, but you really just don't want that happening for a number of reasons. And so having some sort of system, whether it's like one of those retractable keychain things, it's like a clip that you can like clip it onto something and then it zips out. I'm sorry, I don't have a word for that, but that is a great system for securing your hose. I've also just put like a little Velcro loop or a bungee, or like you can see on this upper right-hand corner, this little bungee system I had for carrying chips in my hat. And I would just tuck my hose right into that when I was not drinking so that it was just like secured on top of my cockpit. Okay, now we have our last slide, which is mostly on time, almost, and that is resupplying water. And the main thing I want to talk about with resupplying water, when we talked about all those water sources, it's only the water sources that are coming out of a spigot that you know is treated or safe tap water in towns, in countries where you know you can do that. Otherwise, you need to be treating your water to prevent a variety of waterborne illnesses that are all around the world in all different water sources, and there just aren't ways of knowing what is where. And so the best thing you could do is just treat your water. And there are a number of different ways to do this. A couple of the resources I'll share in the PDF are going to go into a lot more detail about this, because I knew this would be at the end of our webinar and probably be tired of me talking. But the three categories for water treatment are filtration, chemical, and UV. Filtration is very popular because good filters can treat or manage all of the waterborne illnesses. And they these days can be really light. They don't add chemicals to your water. They don't change the taste of your water. They can also be a management of sediment, but I want to talk about that in a second. My two favorites are the HydroPack filter cap on a Flux or a Seeker, which you'll see right here. And then also the Katadyn Be Free, and which is a squeeze bag. And the cool thing about these is that they're inline filters. So you put this cap that has the filter in it onto a hydration bladder, and you just squeeze it, and a well-functioning filter will squeeze really fast. Like you can see maybe barely here. This is a pretty steady stream of water. Like you're not waiting a long time. You're just squeezing water through. And so in that way, they're really light. A lot of these are also additional water capacity. So like this one here, it has a secure cap. So you could fill this 1 liter reservoir or bladder right here and then carry it. And so there you have a full treated water bottle that's a liter. And then you have an additional liter that you could either drink straight out of and it's getting filtered as you drink, or you could refill into a water bottle. So those are super slick and those are my favorite right now. And I know like you all can put your favorite filters in the chat. They're great. If you do, oh, I see a good point. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. If you do have sediment filled water, you really do want to try to either let your water settle overnight if you can before filtering it. Using alum powder can help settle sediment out of like really sediment rich water, like those mud rivers in the Southwest. But if you can't do that, just know, and some people will use bandanas to filter water through to catch sediment. I've never personally done that. My go-to in sediment filled waters is to go to chemical treatment like Aquamira. However, and that is because sediment can quickly clog, that's a tongue twister, quickly clog a filter. And when that happens, you just need to be ready to clean the filter on the go, and you can back flush it regularly to do that. And your filter will have instructions, and if it needs additional tools to do that, it'll come with those. Chemical treatment, Aquamira is my favorite. That's probably because I came of backcountry age with Knowles and Outward Bound where we use that, but it's a liquid solution. The thing about that is that you don't have to wait as long as a lot of other chemical treatment options. Like even the Aquamira tablets take a lot, like hours longer than the liquid. UV treatment, UV ones, I haven't personally used these because they haven't seemed worth it in the places I travel, which often have sediment rich or murky water, but they're not as effective in murky water. Otherwise, they work. There is a comment about boiling water. That is a great option if you have endless fuel. But also if you're just cooking and you want to make a hot drink, you don't have to treat your water ahead of time. You can just fill your pot and bring it to a boil, and then you can drink your water. The fish eyes thing, that technically is not killing these pathogens. Well, okay. I'm seeing testing things. Just like anything, test all of this on a day ride before you're relying on it. Is that some people don't like the taste of iodine, or some people don't like the taste of Aquamira or the counting the drops. Some people don't want to have to squeeze their water. Lastly, for resupplying at water sources, just like eating, this is water you don't have to carry. Just treat some, drink it, retreat the next layer or filter the next amount and carry it away with you. But being able to hydrate right there where the water is, that's saving you half a liter, maybe a liter if you're really thirsty, of water that you just don't have to put on your bike. All right. That is everything I have for food and water. I've referenced this PDF that's coming out. It's going to have, this is a huge topic. Both of these could have been their own webinars. Both of these can be their own degrees in college. Like, there's so much to cover. And you all have a lot of experience as well. And I see great things going on in the chat. And I just want to invite you, if you have the interest and the time, if you want to share a bike packing recipe for a meal with everyone here in this PDF, you can email me the recipe that's complete. Like, please don't just write burritos, but actually explain how to make it and how much to buy for like a person or however many servings, and your name so you get credit, and email that to me with my email right there, Caitlin@bikepackingroots.org, by the end of the day tomorrow. And so this is, again, optional assignment. Just if you want to contribute to this PDF, there's going to be extensive menus and you can throw in something if you want to share it. And then that will all be going out Friday. It's the plan. Otherwise, are there any final questions? Okay, I'm going to go to the Q&A first. Are you ever concerned about getting enough basic vitamins, like taking a multivitamin if you got long stretches in between real food stops? I would say for your average length bikepacking trip, well, I don't know what average is. I shouldn't say that. I'd say for shorter bikepacking trips, like 1 to 5 days, I'm not really worried about it. I eat pretty mindfully as far as getting a lot of nutrients in my day-to-day diet, and knowing that at resupplies, I'm going to be trying to grab something a little nutritious to go along with my ice cream. Um, and that said, like on longer trips, I have then brought like the multivitamins or the vitamins that I just consume on a day-to-day basis, which for me does include a multivitamin. And I think that's like, if you know if your body does really well with that, then bring it. The hardest thing is packaging it into a really tiny bag. Otherwise worth it. How do you lock your bike when you go inside some store to replenish food, or do you lock it? Or is that a concern? That's a great question. That depends so much. And it depends on your own comfort. It depends on your familiarity with the location. It depends on um how much you trust people and the good in the world versus the not. And I would say that that's a very personal decision. I have carried very small locks, which are basically deterrents. I have clipped my bike helmet through my fork and spokes and pulled the through axle out to deter people from riding away on my bike. I most often wheel my bike into a store, which people will look at you kind of funny. Some people will wheel their bike through stores, which there isn't always room for, but some people will do that. And most often, or I think the best thing you can do if you're with other people and you're worried about that, is tag team resupplying. And so when I bike pack with other people, especially in international places or like more populated areas where like I'm maybe just worried about it, I sit next to the bikes while my friend goes in and gets their food, and then they come out and they sit by the bikes and like do whatever it is, like lube their chain, repack their food, uh, take pictures, call their parents, whatever. And while I shop. So yeah, there's no right or wrong way. I think it comes down to your own comfort and strategy. Okay, are there other questions? Ideas on the healthiest, most simple hydration mix? Well, I think that really depends a lot on how you determine healthy. A lot of the really prominent ones like Goo Roctane and Scratch Labs and Cliff Mix, like they're all gonna have pretty similar stuff as far as like having glucose, dextrose, fructose mixtures. You can get Gatorade powder if you call that healthy or not. That's up to you again. You can get juice mixes often, but like those will often have some sort of like corn syrup in them. Um, So yeah, and those would be for calories. And then as far as like electrolytes, there are so many different options out there, and most of them have like a really intentional level of the electrolytes and then usually some sort of sweetener. Liquid IV is great, the goo tabs are great. Um, Salt stick is great. Like there's all different. Noon, I think, is great. There's all different options. And you can also get salt tabs. Awesome. I don't think there are any other questions. Um, if that is the case, then I just want to end with thank you very much. This was our third of an 8-part series. Next up on January 24th, in just 2 weeks, we have our first guest webinar with Eric Parsons, the owner and founder of Revelate Designs. He started making these bike bags way back when there were only 2 of them, formally making them and selling them. And he is actually joining us to talk about bike bag care, repair, DIY systems. The owner of Revelate is going to teach you how to not need to buy bags, which is pretty incredible. And that will be, yeah, same time in 2 Wednesdays from now. And we'd like to thank Revelate Designs Ride with GPS and Shimano for making these all free. And if you find these valuable and you have the capacity to donate anything, whether it's $5 or 500, Bikepacking Roots is dependent on contributions like yours. So thank you. Happy New Year and hope to see you in 2 weeks.